Hey everyone, welcome. So my name is Dr. Yasser Rodriguez with Cardia Real Estate Investments, and I'm joined today by Paul Davison from Lamina Surgical, and this is a case study. Okay, it's going to be centered around a very successful med tech investing opportunity. Okay, it was the PEAK PlasmaBlade. So I'm joined today with Paul, who is actually one of the co-creators of the Plasma Blade. All right, so we're going to kind of dissect it. Really, the purpose is not, any opportunity. It's simply education and to really go through an example of a wildly successful case study. So, for those of you who are not familiar with me, so I'm actually a cardiac electrophysiologist, currently here in the Georgia area at Northside Hospital. And I really have been focused on commercial real estate, single family homes, commercial real estate, and medical, tech investment opportunities. And I'm joined by Paul, who has a supremely successful background in MedTech. So Paul, no surprise, is located in Silicon Valley, West Coast there, and he has had many successful projects, to name a few. He's led 16 FDA cleared products, has worked with huge companies like Medtronic, Baxter, and all that. Paul, can you give us a little introduction?
Yeah, it's been wonderful being in this space for 30 years. And hey, I thank everyone for your time today to hear about this opportunity and situation. Um, we're at Lamina, we're applying a similar, value creation playbook that we use at Peak Surgical, the case study. Yeah, I'm honored to be here. Excited about what I do. I've been doing it since I was 19 years old as a tech and through my first engineering degree and my second engineering degree, from the hands-on level all the way to the executive level. So this is very exciting to be leading Lamina Surgical. And Lamina's co-founder and CTO is on the line as well. So it's our fourth time working together. Between us, there's over 50 years of experience and 21 cleared devices between us and over 16 US cleared patents.
Excellent. And Paul, you want to give us, perhaps a little background from an engineering perspective and through the company?
Yeah, so the plasma blade was essentially an eye surgery concept that came out of Stanford University, and they approached me while I was at ArthroCare to look at it and possibly commercialize it. And I told them it was a bad idea for eye surgery. And they believed me. I thought it'd be good in some open surgeries, implanting and taking out pacemakers, breast cancer, just open surgeries in general. And the company was funded by venture and Lehman Brothers and Vinrock. And some ArthroCare colleagues and I, started the company. I ran R&D from inception to sell. And it's a great case study because it represents a outstanding class two device success. It solves some very notable surgeon pain points. It received rapid surgeon adoption, and as a result, it was acquired by Medtronic. And at the time, that was actually Omar Ishrak's first week on the job. He claims it was his most successful acquisition. It was a small acquisition at 120 million for Medtronic, but it was very accretive for them. They have since done over 3 million procedures with that device. It generates $250 million a year in revenue for Medtronic.
Jeez.
And they're very happy about that because it's highly adopted in the pacing space for putting in or doing de novo and then revision procedures in electrophysiology. And Medtronic's a leader in that space.
Yeah, so
So and that's a key reason why they bought it. And essentially the pain points were tissue burning, safety working around implants, visibility, And if you look at the plasma blade on the left, it has a low thermal spread blade. The shaft extends, so you don't have to use an endoscopic tip for deep cavity cases or deep procedures. It has aspiration at the tip. It has a light integrated into the handle. Those are all unique compared to a Bovie, which is the standard of care for all, direct access surgeries. And the plasma blade plugs into the generator, which is the image on the right. That's an RF generator. It's custom to the plasma blade and another device that they sell called the Aquamanus. And it's been highly adopted. It's a really a great story. I'm very proud to be involved, have been involved in that project. And I'll give you some more details about the plasma blade on slide 7.
Yeah, so maybe Paul, if I can jump in there. So again, just to kind of reverberate the plasma blade, if you can go back one slide. So up until that point in the later 2000s, in cardiac EP, which is my field, and in other fields like surgical, oncology and all that stuff, we were using Bovies. Bovies is just a standard kind of tool that generates power and all that. But the issue was that when you needed kind of finesse cutting or like to protect pacemakers or the insulation and stuff like that, there was no good option. You would damage these things all the time, which would cause huge problems. So nothing up until that point in time existed. So Paul and his team, answered a massive problem. Now, this is a great case study because, well, it's a wildly successful, for many different reasons. So back in 2011, it was acquired by Medtronic for $120 million, which is a rounding error for Medtronic, but in anyone else's kind of environment is a massive sum of money with an incredible potential for return in a reasonable amount of time. So this was a good tool that answered a problem led by a great team, and also it was a win-win-win. A win for investors, a win for patients, and then obviously a win for Medtronic because this thing is now the gold standard, generating ridiculous revenue annually. So it was just a triple win scenario.
And it's a good segue to what creates success in medical devices. Essentially, you typically have people and process, not necessarily the products. And Peak was built by a team by people that had decades of experience in R&D and IP, FDA, commercial, had multiple exits. So investors should look for these patterns. Me personally, I started my career at Baxter Healthcare and then went on to Medtronic. Those are both Fortune 500 companies. I worked amongst very talented people that groomed me for doing what I do today, and went on to ArthroCare, which is a company in Silicon Valley that pioneered wet field electrosurgery. So bipolar devices and joints to do orthopedic surgery, and it's also used in ENT. And that's where Stanford approached me to get involved in Peak Surgical. So that's my kind of origin story to Peak. And, I've been involved in many FDA clearances, mostly class 2 devices, a couple class 3 devices as well. And I've been also involved in 3 exits. ArthroCare was purchased for $1.6 billion. It was a public company. It had been on the market for a while. Invuity was purchased by Stryker for 220, and then Peak for 120 million. So essentially, a capability stack of people really and process of how you do things leads to success in these scenarios. Yasser, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, so I think MedTech opportunities are a foreign concept to most healthcare professionals, ironically. It is traditionally it's these startups that is a relationship between an engineer or engineering team and then typically or historically, you have venture capital angel investors, a lot of which don't even have medical background to begin with. And they have no interest in educating or opening that kind of relationship because it is a potentially a very lucrative, return on investment for them, right? But ironically, physicians, healthcare professionals of all sorts are probably some of the best people to assess the device itself and have just kind of a natural understanding, you know? So in looking at these opportunities, and later in the presentation, we'll go into like the financial aspect and all that. But as Paul mentioned, if you're looking at an opportunity, the team are, importance number one, two, and three is what is the team? Then the product almost. But if your team is no good or not seasoned, that's going to be dead in the water. Anecdotally, I have been approached countless times about med tech opportunities, even since I was a fellow. And most of these are perhaps good ideas, but the teams are like, some 20-something-year-old engineering grad student or something who has a great idea, but ideas alone are not going to get you to the finish line. You want a team that is supremely seasoned, a mixed level of experience and all that stuff. But more importantly, the FDA is one of the biggest hurdles early on. So unless your team has cleared the FDA, which is a very nuanced dance, any interaction with the government will kind of teach you that real quick. But the FDA is very nuanced. So you want a team that knows what it's doing because time is money, just universally, and especially with, these investment opportunities.
Absolutely. So the current standard of care essentially for um, starting companies at this point in medtech are safe notes. Back when PEAK started, it was venture capital. These safe notes work particularly well because value is created through regulatory and technical milestones. So early on, the valuation precision is less important than alignment and speed. As in speed, Yasser pointed out speed, and that's the opportunity with an experienced team is you end up gaining speed. And so um, yeah, so at any rate, usually the progression is some safe note rounds, and then you go to a seed round, then an A round. By the A round, you're commercial, you're investing in sales and distribution, pipeline, expanding the IP portfolio. You can grow the company into a larger scenario at that point, or that's actually a good inflection point for a 200, $500 million plus exit as well, because you're already proven the execution. You have, customers, paid customers, and you develop traction at that point. And so there's very low risk from the strategic standpoint at that point. So in terms of the plasma blade, these milestones that I note here are super important for fundraising and creating value in general. And just to focus on the plasma blade, as you see in the image here, and Yasser pointed this out earlier, it met some really important unmet needs. And Bovies were just being used for dogma and historical purposes. No one really ever disrupted that device previously to the plasma blade. A wonderful aspect of this type of class 2 device is that clinical studies aren't required. A blade like this and some things that Lamina are doing essentially could be demonstrated with prototypes and bench validation and porcine or animal testing. So you have live bleeding models to demonstrate the test results that are what the FDA deems as substantially equivalent to a predicate. And so if a company can find a predicate that is a good launching pad for their device, that's a big value inflection point. And then you demonstrate equivalency to it, and the FDA clears it as such, you can market the device. So this particular device, the plasma blade, is a class 2 device. That means it's a medium to critical level of risk. Class one is devices that don't require clearance. Class two is what I just noted. Class three devices are typically life-saving implantable devices, like pacemakers, for example. They tend to be implants. So in this case, the PlasmaBlade had a clear value, to get to market with a 510(k) clearance. There was surgeon pull and strategics. Not only Medtronic, but Johnson & Johnson was interested in a couple of others. So like, the Peak Surgical did, Lamina, for example, is going to eliminate risk by dealing with these inflection points one by one as we go forward.
And just to kind of reverberate the 510 clearance, that's, involving the FDA and all that. So, as Paul mentioned, if the device that you're proposing is similar enough that to another kind of existing thing, it can serve as a predicate, which can significantly accelerate the clearance process through the FDA, which is one of the first kind of major hurdles and always a variable that if you're looking at a med tech thing as an investor, you really want to key in on. Is this like uncharted territory, or does this product that's being proposed have some sort of a predicate? Because again, time is money. If you can collapse that time table, that's just going to be quicker valuation and a quicker return on capital.
Absolutely. And let me just quickly emphasize the surgeon pull aspect of this because Peak Surgical, as well as Arthrocare, where I was previously, I did a really good job of partnering with surgeons early on through the development process and then on into commercialization, getting involved with conferences and workshops and labs and created a lot of awareness about the product. And at the end of the day, it was very clear for surgeons to see that compared to a Bovie, there was little to no burning, there was little to no smoke. It was safe working around their instruments and implants, and the visualization was better and the workflow was better. So that's the sort of thing that creates surgeon pull with a device. If a surgeon takes it for a test drive, they use it either in an animal or in a live case, and they see value drivers. The strategics take notice through the surgeon adoption and surgeon inputs as well.
And quick reminder, so if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to type it in the Q&A box down there. We'll get it. And I promise we'll answer all the questions at the end of the PowerPoint.
So timing and adoption. Timing matters. It matters less with a medical device versus, a consumer product or software as a service type product, because there's so much competition there. There's so many players. Timing's everything there. With MedTech, a lot of it is about, as we pointed out, the team and how we can execute, solve problems. But essentially, the PlasmaBlade fit seamlessly into existing OR workflows. There was no training required. It was pretty much plug and play. You start using it. We purposely designed the handpiece to be similar to a Bovie in terms of its look and feel, ergonomics. And so there was really no retraining required, and it had a clear hospital return on investment because, for example, in electrophysiology, pacing leads weren't getting burned anymore. And when that previously happened, a certain percentage of the time, the patient would have to have a lead removal procedure, which was very expensive. So the ROI was clear, and essentially anything we do at Lamina, anything that my co-founder and I are involved with, we make sure we're not going to disrupt workflows. We're going to improve them. So these are the items and areas investors must scrutinize carefully in making a medtech investment. Failures happen, not because the idea is bad, but it's because bad execution and regulatory issues and lack of experience. So in the PlasmaBlade's case, it was regulatory clarity. The Bovie was a predicate. The team had quality management system experience. So QMS is the acronym that the FDA uses for the system and process you follow to submit a 510(k) to get clearance to market a device. So having a team that has a great handle on how to manage QMS, particularly electronically in an automated way, is a big um, thing to look for. How defensible is the intellectual property? And usually operators in a space, whether it's if you look at a technology vertical like laser, ultrasound, imaging, radio frequency, because the plasma blade is a radio frequency electrosurgical device like a Bovie. Um, you tend to have people that cluster in those verticals and they know the IP well. They know how to generate new IP in the space. And that's an important evolution that's, I think, needed when you have innovators making improvements in a space. Can the device be reimbursed, or is there an ROI in its use? Does it avoid other problems like reoperations or damage to implants? Or does it avoid having to use other devices like a smoke evacuation system? So those scenarios are really important for investors to look at. Can there be multiple exit opportunities? There's lots of scenarios in consumer products or software or medical device where there may not be too many buyers because it's a very niche sort of product. In the Plaza Blades case, it could be used for many procedures because it's cut, coagulation, access for many procedures. So it created a lot of exit opportunities. And that's something to look for. Is it a device that maybe one or two companies could be interested, or 5 to 10? That's something to scrutinize. And the team
Yeah.
experience, as we've said over and over again, that's a vital aspect in MedTech because it's a specialized area you're working with and partnering with the government to clear devices, expand indications. Um, get additional devices cleared in your pipeline as you scale. So team experience is absolutely vital for an investor to scrutinize.
And just to build on that, Paul, so again, just to kind of reverberate, as an investor, when you're looking at things, a couple different things. So any good business plan ideally has multiple off-ramps, right? You don't put all your eggs in one basket. So you want to make sure that in the form of med tech, you're looking at who are your suitors, how many companies could possibly be interested in whatever products or portfolio of products that you're bringing or trying to bring to market. So the greater that number, that's a good thing, because you have a whole, litany of things that you can kind of, pivot to different companies, different big players, Again, as we mentioned, the team experience, you want people that have done this before, that have gone through the FDA, and that mitigates a lot of the risk associated, with medtech. And then things like intellectual property, the defensibility, how far along are they? Do they have patents? These are things that create value almost inherently the minute that an IP is approved and all that associated with the project. And then lastly, something I see all the time, both as an investor and just as a physician, is reimbursement. If this product ideally should have existing kind of CPT codes, would be the best scenario, right? Because if you're trying to create new CPT codes altogether, that's challenging because the government does nothing and fast, So you don't want, ideally you want to piggyback off of existing CPT codes and you want to simplify things for a health system. You want to make things cheaper, make life easier for them, save money because they're super cost oriented, and have existing CPT codes. So these are variables that you want. No, as Paul mentioned, if you use the Bovie and you damage the pacemaker or whatever, then guess what? That's a complication and you're not going to get reimbursed for that second surgery. So hospitals have keen interest on a slight upfront cost to avoid that very expensive scenario that unfortunately up into the plasma blade was quite frequent. So that's just like a small example, but just to kind of really drive home these points.
So at Lamina, we're applying this playbook that we learned from Peak Surgical, and we're following the same value creation architecture. We're focused on class two devices, clear predicates, disposable economics. Unlike Peak at Lamina, um, we don't have a RF generator. So essentially, it's just a disposable, and we're very disciplined about how we're deploying capital. So we already have surgeons involved, and I think that's going to translate to adoption longer term, and we're going to also it's going to translate to us making sure we get the product sets right as well. So we are very excited about this disposable driven model, and we plan to be able to commercialize our devices in many different procedures, and we'll find a beachhead and then grow from there.
And just to kind of for a little clarity, so when you're looking at when hospitals or any healthcare like ASCs or hospitals, when they're looking at products, they put it into two silos. Number one is disposable. Number two is capital expenditure. So, for example, the plasma blade, wildly successful, has two components. The actual blade that you use during a procedure that you cut and all that fun stuff, that's a disposable. You use it, during the procedure, it's thrown away. You know, um, that's usually a lower cost item compared, right? Now, sometimes that can be associated with a capital expenditure. So, in the case of the plasma blade, when it was designed, it had its own RF generator, meaning you had to plug this plasma blade into a generator that gave it the energy in order to, use, the cut and the coag and all that fun stuff. Now, why I'm pointing that out is because a hospital, a capital expenditure is usually very expensive. To give you an idea, when the plasma blade first came out, the generator was like $50,000. Okay. So think about it. If you're a hospital with like 10 or 20 operating rooms, if you want to use 10 or 20 plasma blades at the same time, you're going to have to start stacking those generators. And that's a lot of cash, up front, So in any medical landscape, but especially nowadays, hospitals have little to no appetite. Like it is the quickest turnoff for a hospital is to see a capital expenditure. Because again, hospital systems, every hospital system, if they're going to approve capital expenditures, it has to go through a committee after a committee after a committee, never-ending committees to approve this because it's a big expense, right? So if you're looking at an investment opportunity, Plasma Blade was wildly successful, even despite this, right? But it is very important. Disposables alone are way more palatable to a hospital system because we just signed a contract and in a couple weeks you can have this thing rolling out, because it's plug and play. I don't have to buy anything new. If it's a capital expenditure and you're looking at an investment opportunity, that should give you a little pause because it's going to pump the brakes on market rollout and commercial adoption. So maybe not right away, but that will be a big barrier for the next milestone. Because up front, it's your team and the FDA clearance and IP. But the next hurdle is going to be when you have this beautiful product that's FDA cleared and maybe, patent protected. Now you got to get this into the hands of your physicians and stuff and roll out. So these concepts become wildly important is disposables, capital expenditures. Ideally, you would love to do disposable driven. And that's just really explaining what Paul was, describing earlier from a physician's perspective.
So although that this is a case study about the success of the plasma blade, we wanted to give you at least a brief introduction to Lamina and what we're doing. And we have another webinar planned to go into more details about Lamina. But just if you look at, a safe return, and as I mentioned, this is the vehicle for MedTech startup investing at this point in time. And this shows the illustrative math if you were to make a $50,000 investment, and how that plays out in terms of a base case. If the company were to be acquired for 150 million, you have a 6 to 9x return. And you know, middle of the road upside 300 million, 12 to 18x, and then an outlier. And that's possible in general, with a company that has a pipeline beyond one product. If you have other devices you're starting to surround that one product with, and they play well, and they enhance workflow and provide, patient benefits, provider benefits, and payer benefits, then that's how you get to these outlier scenarios where you can have 20 to 30x at this inflection point of a company. Another really interesting advantage that I want to share with you relative to medical device investing that does not imply to software or an app or something like that is, Lamina and PEAK was as well, is considered a qualified small business stock per Internal Revenue Code, 1202. Because Lamina is a domestic C Corp, it has less than $50 million in assets. If you hold the stock for 5 years, you actually can exclude up to 100% of federal capital gains taxes on the investment. So that's another really interesting upside to an investment in like a Peak Surgical or a Lamina Surgical, is this QSBS advantage.
Yeah, and Paul, just to kind of emphasize a little bit. So from a physician or like an investor perspective, MedTech has a position in a portfolio, right? So, once you go beyond, mutual funds, your retirement, the usual, there's a whole wide world out there that can fit into a nice balanced portfolio that, you mix different kind of products in, right? So a lot of our audience, or some of them, are familiar with, like real estate, commercial real estate, and all that. And while there are some similarities, there's really important distinctions. So MedTech opportunities, um, they usually do not provide cash flow while you hold it. It has a similar timetable to commercial real estate. You're talking about a 5 year or just over kind of horizon. So let's say you invested $50,000. Most of the time, you're looking at a 5 year or more kind of time horizon, But unlike almost any other investment class that at least I'm aware of, is that the potential for returns is ridiculous, like astronomical. In the case of the plasma blade or the Peak, back in 2011, it was acquired for $120 million. That was 14 years ago, $120 million, one product, and a huge return. I mean, a huge return. Now, again, up front, there isn't like depreciation or anything like you could do with real estate, which is one of the attractive kind of things that you can do with real estate. There's not a lot of that. It's illiquidity with a time horizon of like 5 years or whatever, right? But the reward, is at the end, you can have ridiculous kind of outsized or disproportionate returns, and the strong flex that MedTech can potentially provide is the qualified small business. So if you hold this thing for over 5 years, you're potentially excluding all federal taxes from that. I'm not very aware, there are a few examples that have that kind of tax sheltered opportunity. So I think it's a move that, again, it's not without risk. You have to look at the team and the product, the FDA clearance, and then finally the market plan, But when these things come, together, you have the potential for some significant returns on your investment.
Absolutely. And I personally was able to benefit from QSBS during my time at Peak Surgical from my stock options. And, from the day I talked to some physicians and a physics professor at Stanford when we were getting Peak going, that from inception to market to acquisition was 5 years.
Wow.
And so that's a timeline. And as you pointed out, Yasser, that's common, and
Yeah.
it allows this QSBS to mature. A lot of MedTechs are around longer than that as well because they want to build more of a runway and they're not ready for exit and so on. But 5-year scenario is possible, and this QSBS is a very possible opportunity relative to investing in a company like this. So strategics buy companies in the 200 to $400 million range because they are de-risked. The clinical utility has been demonstrated. The visibility to revenue and working with hospitals and uh, showing growth is there. There's uh, a platform fit scenario that companies go through when they look at startups and emerging companies to buy. They look how it can complement their existing products. With the plasma blade, for example, in the early days to get adoption, Medtronic was a little bit of the tail wagging the dog scenario. Medtronic was actually giving away pacemakers to place generators and to promote it. They were very excited about it. So um, you want to look for in the strategics, look for this. How will these devices fit into our portfolio? And often the economics don't even have to math out for them. They want things that are going to help with pull through of their base products. So a Stryker, for example, has orthopedic implants, or Medtronic has pacemakers, or Hologic is a women's health company that has devices for various surgeries. Are you going to have more pull through if you bring this strategic acquisition in? And often TAM, or total available market, and the economics are actually sometimes less important to them than strategic pull-through. So that's a really nice opportunity for small, growing, emerging companies, is to get the eye of a strategic that has an excitement level about a platform fit. Now, if you have all the economics that math out, like the Plasma Blade did, that's just a big bonus on top of it. And they also buy on speed and certainty. They've seen, a company execute and run, and they know the velocity, and they know what quality management system they use. They've looked at their FDA filings. They've assessed their intellectual property. That takes all the risk out of it for them. So once that's been demonstrated, they're comfortable, writing a 200 to 400 plus $1 million check. So they buy certainty. And Yasser knows a lot of these companies. He works with them. He uses their devices. He's familiar with how they operate, how they work. He
Yeah.
goes to conferences. So he understands this world very well.
Yeah. And some companies are wildly successful. So it's kind of like, analogous to like football and stuff. You can build through the draft, or you can just kind of acquire in free agency. And companies, have different kind of approaches. So Boston Sci has been on a just crushing it the last couple of years. Ironically, they're the ones that missed out on the plasma blade at the 11th hour. Medtronic kind of swooped in and took it from Boston Scientific. But Boston Scientific has done some amazing acquisitions at this stage that has been wildly successful for them. The Watchman and the Farapulse being the two latest examples. So companies come in at this point, and I mean it's a win-win-win again for patients, for the company, and for the initial company getting acquired and the investors associated with that.
So this is an example of how, a safe note will work. And this is just an education slide on, dilution, essentially. It's normal. And as a company like Peak Surgical or a Lamina progresses, as long as capital is removing risk, milestones are being achieved, then milestones are known, and it's executing, that's what matters. That enterprise value is growing, faster than dilution. That's the key takeaway, and it's normal. And yeah, it's great to have, you may start with a 0.5% of the company on your investment, but if the company gets acquired for $400 million, you're not going to complain about having 0.25% at the end. That's going to be a good problem to have. So that's what we want to try to achieve, as a leadership team and as a company to make sure that we maintain value for investors as we progress through the milestones. All right. So, in closing, it's key as an investor that you recognize patterns early. And for those interested, we'd be glad to share more details about the safe round we're doing. Yasser, if you have anything else, go and add, but we're open to questions and answers at this point. And I really thank you for your time to learn about this case study and potential opportunity with Lamina.
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul. No, thanks for going, through that. Again, this is a concept that unfortunately we don't get exposure to or any training. I do have some questions here. Um, so Paula, so this is what we covered today is not actually an investment opportunity. It's a case study. This was analyzing. This was analyzing a case study of something that already happened. This particular product, Paul co-created and helped lead the team during the inception and the acquisition, but it's not an active investment opportunity at the moment. This already happened years ago. It was acquired, and we just kind of wanted to deconstruct because there's a lot of things done right and teaching opportunities in this particular case study. But usually talking in broad strokes, with MedTech, a lot of the times it's easier and it falls under the 506(c) or accredited investor. So, usually the people investing in this more likely than not, it depends on the situation, but are going to be 506(c)s, which again are open to accredited investors, which is a very overwhelmingly, most healthcare professionals will fall automatically into the definition of an accredited investor. The IRS just has kind of specific, guidelines, must earn over X amount every year and blah, 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 so. But again, this is not an active opportunity at the moment. And usually in these med techs, a lot of time the minimum investment will be around $50,000. Sometimes it'll be a little less or a little more, but that's generally in the ballpark. But again, this is not an active, opportunity. And Paul is located in Silicon Valley. If you can't tell through his tan there, but he's an avid competitive surfer and a genius engineer. So hopefully that answers that. Where you live in San Francisco, right, Paul?
Yeah, I live
Yep.
in Oakland. My co-founder Jason lives in San
Oh,
Francisco, and
nice.
we have people throughout the Bay Area. It's kind of a triangle of talent in this region, from San Jose to San Francisco to Oakland or the East Bay. Fortunately, between Caltrain and BART, and we can all work together and develop these wonderful technologies, and a significant amount of med tech throughout the last 40, 50 years has been come out of Silicon Valley. And obviously Intuitive Surgical is here, Arthrocare was where I was at, Advanced Cardiovascular Systems, which that became part of Guidant. That's the largest part of Guidant. There's a long history of devices in all sectors that are part of strategics now that come out of this area. There's a big talent pool. There's other cells of med tech and around the country. Boston has a lot of imaging type projects. Minneapolis, because Medtronic and Boston are there. There's been some projects in Florida, some in Southern California as well, like Edwards. I used to actually work at Edwards when I was at Baxter. Baxter Healthcare used to own Edwards. That's in Irvine. So that's the kind of the landscape of where MedTech is. But by far, Silicon Valley has probably spawned the most devices in MedTech in its history.
Yeah. And Robert brings up a great point. So we talked about the qualified small business tax benefit that hits 100% at 5 years. He brings up an excellent point. It's actually graded as well. So at the 4 year mark, you have 75%, and at the 3 year mark, you have 50%. So it kind of ramps up starting from year three to the full effect at five. So again, an important point, and thank you, Robert, for emphasizing. And I guess the last question I see here, just in interest in time and everybody, is perhaps I think there's a question about the impact of what a predicate is and how much does it speed up the process in the beginning. So, Paul, maybe if you can answer that.
Yeah, the impact is significant because the FDA, views their goal is safety and minimizing risk. There are no stipulations in a submission for being better. So if you're equal to or better, that's the equal to is the bar. Substantial equivalence is the legal language at the FDA. Having a clear predicate is critical. There have been companies that have failed in the predicate assignment phase because they have taken a device from, say, it's used for shoulder surgery, and they've tried to, implement it in knee surgery, and they didn't have the appropriate bridging between the two, and had to go back to the drawing board or do some clinical work, a small clinical study to support their submission. So essentially, the plasma blade had a clear predicate, and as a result, it did not require clinical, and bench testing and animal testing supported its safety and efficacy relative to the FDA. So anything that we would do at a lamina, and you're going to learn more about that in later times from Yasser and I, but it will take that same playbook going forward. And one way to de-risk that or make sure that the FDA is in alignment in that sense with the predicate is to have a pre-meeting with them. And this is a really big aspect of working with an experienced team because typically the team has someone that has relationships at the FDA or they know regulatory people that do. And they can arrange those pre-meetings, confidently go in there and explain their device versus the predicate and set the stage with the agency before the submission even happens. So the predicate strategy is really vital, and I have employed that and understand it very well in my past experiences.
Excellent. Well, I think, in the interest of time and to respect everyone's time, hopefully, you found a lot of value, a lot of learning there. I wanted to thank everybody. I know everyone has usually a family, a job, a whole life going on, and for you to take, 40 minutes, 45, and spend it with us, whether it's in a recording or live, we sincerely appreciate that. Hopefully, this brings you value, opens up, your mind to a different kind of realm that I personally had little experience until I got a little more into investing and stuff like that, because we're certainly not taught this at med school or training. So Paul, huge thank you for your time, for going through, this amazing, case study. And biased note, Plasma Blade is one of my favorite tools that I used starting in my fellowship and to present. And when I found out that Paul was the co-creator of it, I mean, I was a little in a nerdy way starstruck. So, but thanks again, guys. I hope you have a great, rest of your evening there. And feel free to reach out to, to Paul. You have his email there, or to myself. And we're happy to kind of go over any of the concepts. You can join our Facebook group and just kind of real-time discussions there, which is facebook.com/groups/Cardia Partners. Okay, so hope everyone has a good night. And again, thanks for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.